Hello, thank you for joining us for today's Ask the Pet Food Pro. I'm Debbie Phillips Donaldson, Editor-in-Chief of Pet Food Industry, and I'll be your moderator today. Ask the Pet Food Pro is a series of expert chats brought to you by Pet Food Forum and the editors of Pet Food Industry. You can find our content at petfoodindustry.com. Today's session is sponsored by Flex X-Ray, so thank you very much to them. It will address an important pet food safety topic, foreign material contamination, and sounds like we're going to have some interesting stories to learn about today. Our experts are Paula Schwartz, Senior Director of Key Accounts at Flex X-Ray, and Tiki Lyons, Director of FSQAS at Bright Pet. Welcome, Paula and Tiki. We are going to dive into the discussion with them very soon, but first I have a few housekeeping notes. You've all been muted to ensure everyone can hear and focus on the discussion, so please submit your questions or comments in the chat box. Some of you have submitted questions beforehand. We really appreciate those, and we'll try to get to as many as we can today. And finally, this chat is being recorded. You can access the recording starting in about a week at petfoodforumevents.com, and you can click on the More tab at the top of the page and then scroll down to Ask the Pet Food Pro in the drop-down menu. So with that, let's move into our program for today. Paula is going to start us off by sharing a few slides.
Thanks. Today, the topic of the presentation is solving the foreign material contamination challenge through external inspection. But I do feel like we're just going to have a lot of interaction and ask Tiki a bunch of real life experiences and examples of different challenges of foreign material, and starting from mitigation all the way to, a third party inspection service. So we're looking forward to chatting back and forth. And like she said, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat. A little bit about FlexRay, if you're not familiar, we are a third-party inspection service that looks for foreign material. If you aren't familiar with how our process works, essentially, we're like TSA for food. So if you send your suitcase through the X-ray machine at the airport with the person looking at the screen, that's exactly what we do with a bag of, kibble or a box of cans of wet pet food. So that's gives you a visual of what it really looks like. We have 6 facilities across the United States. Our goal is to be within about 8 hours of large food and pet food manufacturing sites. And we have over 26 inspection lines across these facilities. We are USDA and FDA inspected, and we do work with 16 of the top 20 companies in the United States. And we just recently opened in France, and we're scheduled to be in Canada in Q4. Generally, when we're inspecting your product, we're able to release or show that at least 97% of the product is salvageable. So that is a really great ROI if you're looking to save product and not send it to the landfill. I am Paula Schwartz, Senior Director of Sales and Key Accounts at FlexRay. I have been there for a little over 4 years, and I've been in the food industry since 2003. And for about the last 10 to 12 years, really had a lot of pet food customers that I've been able to help in the food safety world. So I'm excited to talk to Tiki today and see what she can teach us.
All right. Thanks, Paula. So I'm Tiki Lyons. I'm the Director of Quality, Food Safety, and Sanitation for Bright Pet. I've also been in the pet food industry since 2003, various roles with Mars, Hills, Red Collar, and then Bright Pet the last almost a year now. So yeah, it's totally in pet food. I don't have any human food experience, so I have a very unique perspective about foreign material in pet food, but I do have a fair amount of experience across all formats, right? So canned and biscuits and treats and dry kibble and now freeze dry.
Thank you, Tiki. Pop quiz, and I think we're going to run a poll on this, but on average, how frequently do you have foreign material contamination incidents in your facility that you oversee?
Just give us 1 second to pull that up, please. There we go.
What does the poll say? Quarterly, 35%, and that aligns exactly with the information that I have available. We run a benchmark report every year, and last year, a majority of the respondents did also agree that they have an incident at least quarterly. Sorry about that. Yeah, so 73% of respondents that we did in our benchmark report agreed that they have a foreign material incident at least quarterly. But if you have one more frequently than that, I would say that you're not alone, so don't feel bad. we see that, it's as often as weekly, and it depends how you classify your foreign material incidents. But I hear a lot about blue plastic gloves and bag liners and things like that, and they probably happen more than quarterly. It's really Foreign material is just kind of an unspoken challenge in the food industry. I feel like, from a personal level, micro is really at the top. And we see that if you look at recalls. So there were over 80 recalls in the United States due to foreign material last year for food and pet food. And the top three are micro, second is allergen, and third is foreign material. So it is there, it's prevalent, and it's a problem. And like I said earlier, the quarterly foreign material is over 73%. Where do those sources of foreign material come from in the supply chain? And we're going to get into this a little bit more, but we all know that it can be in any piece of the process. And so, where you can identify the foreign material coming into the process is the first step in prevention. Tiki, we have a question. What are
Yeah,
the most common sources of foreign material in a pet food manufacturing operation?
in my experience, our first introduction is from ingredients, right? The ingredients that we're receiving, agricultural commodities, right? You get rocks and sticks, it's unavoidable. I think what we forget about sometimes is the foreign material that we actually introduce ourselves sometimes, whether we have maintenance activity that may introduce welding slag or metal shavings, all the way to, like you talked about earlier, Paula, about rubber gloves. And I've seen bonnets and beard nets and things like that. So yeah, I think the most common, probably for me in my experience, is a combination of the two, right? The two big ones are inbound from raw materials, and then by our own design, right? Maybe it's equipment or personnel.
I would definitely agree with that, especially in the commodities, corn, soybeans, things like that. What are the natural things like rocks? What are the things we introduce, which is the people part of this? And the people part of this goes from the raw material all the way to the finished goods. And so the best we can do in terms of processing and GMPs and all that is helpful, but it's not avoidable, I would say.
Agreed.
So foreign material will always be around, but how to respond to it, it's always evolving. And I think where we look at this is from the prevention standpoint, where I hear from my customers, I'll have customers that say, hey, we have put in X, Y, and Z, and we're going to reduce foreign material by 30%. So what do those things look like? What controls do you have that you can make improvements are, how you can change your process, those kind of things. And it's from start to finish in the operation. It's not just one piece of that. So Tiki, with that, next question is, what are some of the most effective strategies for pet food manufacturers to prevent foreign material in their plant?
So I think one of the things I think we may forget about sometimes is the very first control, right, which is supplier control, right? Having a good, robust supplier approval program so you understand where your ingredients are coming from. You understand what mitigations they have in place in their facility, right? Keeps the big things out. A lot of times you'll have magnets and things that you're unloading, especially if you're unloading bulk ingredients like commodities, right? Probably we've seen shovels and wrenches and all kinds of things come in with those commodities. And I think the reliance on that initial magnet is good. What you have to make sure you're doing is checking those magnets, right? I've seen them blinded pretty rapidly by large things. They're not a total mitigation, right? But I think those magnets, sieves, any sort of shakers, any sort of screening. The other thing that I think that's been important in dry pet food in the factories that I've been in is a magnet system right before you go to preconditioning, right? Is that coming off of that hammer mill, if you happen to blow a screen or you have, something that you didn't know was in there, that last sort of magnetized piece of equipment there, pulling out any sort of metal before it gets to your extruder and basically destroys it. So.
And I think, when we talk about strategies to prevent foreign material, and we really hone in on the supplier monitoring or supplier approval, a lot of times I'll get a question of, what does that look like? what should be involved in that. And if you don't know where to start, I think a good start is looking at your suppliers. Which ones are the highest risk product? What are maybe the top three of your ingredients? If you're using raw chicken and bone is a problem, maybe that's at the top of your list. Secondly, which suppliers have been more problematic in the past? Which ones are you getting the most complaints on when you're using their product, whether it's all the way at finished goods or when you're unloading that product to be used in your grinder or things like that? So if you start with those kind of things, and I think a lot of people have a supplier approval or supplier monitoring program, probably based around right micro and quality attributes. But why isn't foreign material considered in some of those criteria when you're picking suppliers or you're monitoring suppliers that are not as compliant as you would like to be? So if you don't really know where to start, I would say look at a couple of those things, and that will help you guide what you might want to implement in a supplier monitoring program. Tiki, do you have any experience or advice you'd give on supplier monitoring or supplier approval?
Yeah, I think, I think the important part of that program is the collaboration and partnership with your vendors, right? Most vendors they're not intentionally adulterating anything, right? They want us to have good quality product. They want us to continue to buy from them, right? And so early notification of issues, letting them know there's a problem, working with them. Sometimes they don't know the solve, right? They don't understand what's happening, right? And being able to work with them, like, so that I think that's the first piece. But the second piece is not being afraid to have a hard conversation, right? That says, hey, we've had 5 problems with you in the last 7 loads. Like, if we, and we've talked about it, if we can't get it together, we're going to disqualify you and pick another one. Right. And sometimes they say, okay.
I think along with that, Tiki, I was at a Pet Food Alliance meeting. Maybe it was last year. I'm not really sure, but they had put a lot of work around what that might look like. And very elementary in that conversation was make sure that you're providing your supplier with all the information that you can from that product, just like you want a customer when they're making a customer complaint. So whether it's a Best By date or Julian date or specific pallet tag or any of those kind of things. And then whatever the foreign material is, have you measured it with a ruler or some sort of a penny because it's this size or whatever. So giving your supplier the amount of information that you would like when you're getting a customer complaint, I think is huge in helping them investigate the situation and then hopefully putting things in place to prevent a reoccurrence.
I agree. And don't be afraid to send the material to them if they request it. Document it, take some pictures, make a good documentation. And if they request to see it, let them see it. Right. I know usually if something comes from my product stream or not, right? Did I create the issue in my factory? But sometimes I don't know. Right. And if I can't see it, if somebody says, well, we had a problem, a consumer says they have a problem and they're not willing to show me what the problem is, it's very difficult for me to solve. Right. And so I think making that, to your point, the more detail you can provide, the more detail you can provide about whatever the issue was, the better, and the quicker you can do it, the better off you'll be.
Next question. How can I work with my suppliers to reduce forward material in the product? And I think, we just talked about this a little bit, but what are some, maybe you even have a story, Tiki, of a situation where you worked with a supplier and you gave them that information and then there was a positive result later.
Sure. So yeah, I think the main thing is when you're visiting your suppliers, whether you're visiting with them or whether virtually or whether you're actually in their facility, is understanding what mitigations they have in place, right? Some are very robust and some are rudimentary, right? And so we've worked with suppliers to install additional magnets, right? If we're receiving material that has metal shavings from grinding, working with them to put in additional magnets to make sure that we're drawing those out or as much of that out as we can before we receive it. I'm going to just be honest, the biggest struggle we've had recently is with clear plastic, right? And there's not a lot that I'm aware of in the industry yet that can identify very tiny little squares of clear plastic, right? Photo eye typically doesn't see it. And so it's continuing to work with those suppliers, right? And for me, it's continuing to work with Paula to understand what's available out there, so that if whether that's for me, and maybe it's not for me, but maybe it's for my supplier, to install some things that give us a little better opportunity to catch the things up front.
So with this clear plastic, which again can be very hard to see with detection equipment or from the naked eye, have you been able to identify a source of this?
So for us specifically, one of the things that we're seeing in our own factory, right, is the clear plastic bags that material comes in, right? Whether it's frozen or maybe it's individually quick frozen chunks of meat. As we tear that material apart to dump that into our hoppers, like I said, some of it's by our own design, right? We don't make clear cuts. We inadvertently push the material in the box directly over the hopper. Don't do that. Right. Keep the things away from your hopper if you can. One of the incidents we had in another factory that I was in was we were dumping boxes that were attached to a pallet directly over the hopper, and we started seeing chunks of wood, right? And we're like, where are these chunks of wood coming from? Well, they were breaking off of the pallet and you couldn't see it, right? Because of the way it was oriented over the bin. So I think it's pay attention to what your teams are doing. But for me, it was literally walking out to the floor and watching them. How are you opening these bags? What material are, like, what knife are you using? What cutting utensil are we using? And then, like I said, orienting that addition away from the very top of the bin. And I think, Paula, what we're seeing too is from our suppliers, right? It's the same thing. It's that same plastic, it's those same bags. And frankly, I'm going to find out soon because I'm going to go see a couple of suppliers because I want to see how they're opening the bags, right? In canned pet food years ago, it used to be the blue plastic, right? They wrapped the blocks of meat in blue plastic. The blue plastic froze to the meat, and if it wasn't tempered completely, you never got rid of it, right? So I think we're seeing a lot of that still now. They've just changed from blue to clear. So more to come on that.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point. Get out on the floor and
Yeah.
see what somebody is doing, whether you need to take operations with you or maintenance or whatever. It's been about 100 years since I was actually a FSQA manager in a plant. But when you go out on the floor and you see what's really happening, that's your best set of eyes. Ask the people on the line questions. What do they see? They're there every day, they're doing it. And the other thing is, when I went into our customers as a FlexRay salesperson, or when I was in the micro world going and visiting plants, just walking in and being a new set of eyes, things that somebody that's been in there for the last 3 years every day straight doesn't see because they're just used to it. And so I think it's really important that you go evaluate what's happening on in the process and get down on the floor and take somebody new with you, because they're going to see something different. I was at a pet food supplier that has an enclosed system for wet pet food, and they showed me where the metal detector and the x-ray was, and they explained what their SOPs were and things like that. And even though they had not hit the limit to put product on hold, they were at the upper limit for multiple checks in a row. And so I asked what the process was. And unless it hits the threshold, then we don't do anything. And in that process, you could run from anywhere from 8 hours to several days in a row. And so when you're close to that threshold, does it make sense to do extra checks or shut down the line or check the grinder more frequently if it looks like you're approaching on a situation that could essentially put multiple days of production on hold? So I encourage you to put on a different set of eyeglasses and what that might look like when you're trying to reduce the foreign material incidences that you're looking at your own facility or at your suppliers.
Yeah.
So what is the go ahead, Tiki.
I was just going to say, I think you brought up a good point about being on the floor, right? I'm always fresh eyes because of my position. I'm in multiple plants all the time, right? But talking to people, right? The people on the line are whether it's your receivers or your ingredient receivers or the people working the line, they're your first line of defense to food safety, right? And they will talk to you if you just spend the time to talk to them, right? Stop and talk to them and encourage them to tell you if you see something, say something, right? Tell me, tell your quality manager, tell your ops manager, tell somebody, right? Because the quicker you tell somebody, the quicker we can intervene and get that product held and create some bookends, right? Otherwise, you're, like you said, you're dangerously close to the edge of your, of whatever your threshold is, and you're just, grinding it out, and you're going to hit that threshold, right? Just pretty quickly.
I think the see something, say something thing is where I've seen so many companies find success in reducing their foreign material. I've seen where, hey, there's a monthly gift card drawing because somebody said something, say something, and everybody that submits something gets their name in the hat. Another thing is when FSQA doesn't have to report the foreign material findings or incidences, when it becomes an operations or maintenance part of the weekly or monthly report, because nobody wants to report that we put this much product on hold or we destroyed this much product because it's on them instead of FSQA. And so it brings a different sense of responsibility and leadership. I have a personal story of see something, say something. Honestly, I worked for a restaurant company, and the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, we had started to get complaints about blue plastic in a product. And upon further investigation, a metal detector wand had gotten lost and chopped up in product. And the person that lost it had actually told someone, but above that, nothing happened. And so 3,000 restaurants had blue plastic in a product that they were trying to serve to a restaurant. So the see something, say something is incredibly important. And I always go back to that story of when people are asking questions or does it really matter? Yes, it really does matter. And that kind of leads into the next side. What is the cost of foreign material contamination? So obviously, if we have foreign material contamination, whether it's from a customer complaint, if we find it internally before it gets to the customer, and what I say when people call me is, hey, let's celebrate. Somebody did their job because you have it under control. And now we can look and see what our options are of making this problem, finding a solution to this problem. So we can look at all sorts of different things, which you guys are all, attest to. But first of all, if you're going to throw it away, like what is the value of that product? But beyond just the cost of the product, what does it cost to remake that product? What does it cost to have downtime on that line to investigate what happened with that product? If it gets outside of your control, are you damaging a customer relationship? Are you damaging your brand? If it's really serious, are you in a recall? What does that look like? The average recall, I think right now, they say it's about $10 million. So putting some product on hold, even sending a couple loads to FlexRay, is far cheaper than a $10 million recall. So the cost of foreign material, sure, there's a monetary value, but there's also some really serious implications of customer relationships, brand reputation, consumer perception. And what we have to think about in the pet food world is it's like toddlers are children. Our consumer can't tell us what is wrong. And so they're relying on you, pet parents, and the pet parents' perception of the situation is really the reality. And so the cost of foreign material goes far beyond a monetary number, I would say. So next question, how can we properly mitigate the impact from a foreign material event in our plant?
I think probably what we just talked about, right? The first order of business is to get your people to talk, right? Tell you if they see something, tell you, what's going on. I think having the appropriate mitigation equipment, right? So an example, if you have receiving magnets and they're not the appropriate strength, or you're not checking those magnets as you're unloading, right? If you're unloading 25 loads of corn before you ever check your magnet, probably a couple things is going to happen. One, that magnet's going to get blinded. Two, you're not going to be able to tell which vendor sent you that corn, and maybe you could return their wrench or whatever other, nice big things that end up on your magnet. But, having the appropriate equipment in those appropriate spots. If you are fortunate and you can afford visual equipment, great. But I think that's what it boils down to, right? Is having the appropriate equipment that's either right size, right equipment for the job kind of thing, and getting people to talk to you about what's going on. I think from the impact, I think it's around how quickly can you get your arms around that product, right? As quickly as you can. You want to get your bookends established and get that product on hold. And then for me, it's calling Paula. That's what happens in my world, right? If it's something I can't mitigate effectively with something I have, then she's my first call. But and as much for whatever services FlexRay has, it could be that, or it just could be because I know Paula and I know she's seen a lot of things, right? So I think establishing those relationships in the industry and developing your network so you have folks you can call is how do you have you seen this before? How did you manage it when you had it in your factory? But getting your arms around that product as quickly as you possibly can is the first important step. A lot of times what happens in that with the disposition of that product, it's not my decision, right? It's gathering the facts and then passing that on to the executive team of the plant or the company that says these are the things we're going to do. A lot of times it's their decision on whether we move to additional mitigation or we destroy the product.
Yeah, and I think with that, if you choose to use a third-party service like FlexRay and you've put it on hold, you've done your risk assessment, yes, it makes sense. I have 20 loads of product that I need to send. Be prepared for the results that we're going to give you because generally we're going to find something that maybe you weren't expecting. I specifically have a pet food example where they had a metal situation and they sent us some product and we began inspecting the product and we found a lot of rock. And after they did investigation and the risk assessment and all the things, they discovered it was from a raw material supplier. But at, the time of the investigation and when it went from, 3 truckloads of product to 30 truckloads of product, the customer's operations team began asking questions about our process because, where's this rock coming from? And we jokingly said, are we going to the parking lot, and cleaning up rocks and sending them back to you, which we obviously were not. But when they did their investigation, yes, they did have a problem with stone. And then it became a different conversation about what they were going to do with the product because, again, it was a pet food, it was some kibble, and, how is that going to affect the end consumer? And the end consumer can't tell us that. So I think looking at all the pieces and being ready to take the data or the information that you get from the investigation and making the appropriate call or next step.
Agreed.
So, what does in-house rework or inspection look like versus third party? And what I want to say, on a high level, it's just like when I was in the micro testing world. You send to a third party lab for salmonella and E. coli testing because that lab knows what they're doing and they're good at it. You are good at making pet food. I am good at inspecting pet food or people food. From high level, let people do the job that they're trained to do. If you have inline detection systems, whether it's metal detectors, x-rays, those kind of things, first of all, are they properly calibrated to your product? Are you recalibrating it if you're using a different product? What is your spec or what do you need to be able to detect? In my situation, if we're going just x-ray to x-ray inline versus third party, we're running at a much slower rate. At the beginning of this, I talked about TSA for food, and that's exactly what it is. We're running 3 to 5 feet per minute. Our machines are calibrated to inspect at 0.8 ferrous and 1.0 stainless. And even if an internal x-ray machine has that capability, you're generally not running it slow enough to be able to see those sides for material contamination. So it's important that your equipment is calibrated and used appropriately. The next part of it is if you're going to try to do rework, are you shutting down a line and losing, production time on that line where you would be able to produce new product? Are the people running that equipment, are they trained to that? My first question always is somebody says, I might rework this internally. Well, how confident are you in your training of the reinspection? And immediately everybody takes a gasp back. I didn't think about that. I put them on the line. I tell them to look at this and we hope for the best. Somebody that's working third shift or a Saturday that's there for the overtime, they might be as motivated to find foreign material as somebody that's trained to do that. And so just keep those kind of things in mind. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and expecting different results. So if you're running product that you already know has an issue through the same equipment, are you going to get a different result? Or are you confident in the results that that equipment is able to do? And I just kind of already talked about this, but the detection limits are definitely made smaller by the speed of the lines, the size that you're looking for, and those kind of things. So if you're considering internal rework, really look at the capability of your machine and does it have the technology to identify what you're looking for at the speed that you're going to be running it. Next question. What are the common things plants overlook when it comes to foreign material?
Hmm. I would say maybe I think you kind of talked about it a little bit from an X-ray standpoint, right? We're constantly looking for metal or plastic or right these very common foreign materials. I think we overlook things that we don't see as foreign material a lot, like naturally occurring things like rocks and sticks and bones and those kind of things, right? Kernels of rice. I mean, if you have a lot of broken kernels of rice, no, it's not a foreign material. But when your consumer sees those broken kernels of rice whole, like maybe you've blown a screen or something in your hammer mill, they see those whole kernels of rice in a kibble, and they think it's foreign material, right? And so are we thinking about the foreign material that's what I would consider naturally occurring? Are we thinking about what consumers may see as foreign material and maybe it's really not? I had an experience literally on the floor yesterday. So, again, I'm just learning about freeze dried and frozen and what the meat looks like after it's freeze dried. And I looked at a pile of material in a bag and I was like, why does that look like that? I thought it looked like wax paper. It was ligament. It was ligament from a liver, right? I had no idea that that's what liver looked like when you freeze dried it. And I was like, what is wrong with this? And I'm like, I'm having a heart attack because I think we've got all this wax paper in this liver and it's not, right? And so I think don't only focus on the things that you understand as foreign material, really look at the things you know, that you may not understand really, and really pay attention to what your consumers and customers are saying to you about what they're finding, right? You have to understand what is plausible and possible in your factory and what is not, right? What can we introduce in this factory and what can't we introduce, right? That I can't talk about that enough, right? You've got to know if someone sends you a bolt, is it yours or is it not?
I think something that kind of ties right into that are gaskets. Everybody a couple years ago, especially when I was starting in this foreign material world, hey, metal detectable gaskets are the greatest thing ever. And maybe they are, and maybe they're not. But what I hear is that they become more brittle and so they fall apart faster. And the thing about a metal detectable gasket, from what I understand, is that the shelf life of those is different in every situation because they're cleaned differently, they're used differently, the production lines have different amounts of product that are going through, and so nobody can really tell you when those should be replaced. And if you have them on a PM program and you're regularly replacing them, you're probably ahead of the game. But at the same time, if these gaskets cost more and they fall apart more, are they causing you more issues than not? So, a lot of companies have just told me, hey, we've tried to eliminate gaskets altogether where we can, stainless to stainless, and not do that. But if you are using gaskets, what are you doing to prevent them from becoming foreign material? And the great thing about our CT machine is we've been able to detect a lot of gaskets that we couldn't with the 2D X-ray. So if there's gaskets that you have had a problem with before and you're not sure if they can be seen by our CT machine or not, I would definitely, encourage you to send us a sample of your product and a sample of that gasket, and we'll let you know what size we can see. And then if you have a foreign material incident going forward, which we hope you don't, But if you do, then hey, you'll at least know there's an option of salvaging some of that product. The FlexRay process. So if you're interested in submitting a sample like we just talked about, what really happens is, okay, you have a foreign material incident, you have product on hold. You send us a case of your product, and if you have the foreign material that you're looking for, you can send that. Otherwise, we'll just use our standard seeds, especially if it's metal. We'll let you know what size we can see it at. You send it to us. We inspect the product. It takes us usually 4 to 6 hours to inspect a load. And then we usually do contaminant retrieval, is where we actually take the foreign material out of the product and we put it on a report. We send you an electronic version of the report, and then we also send you the actual live foreign material, FedEx it back to you. You get the reports, and then you can make a decision, based on the data that we send you, if this makes sense to release or it's a food safety issue and you need to do something else with it. And like I said at the beginning, over 97% of the product we inspect actually is salvageable. And so that's a really good thing to keep in the back of your mind as you're looking at ways to increase revenue, ROI, sustainability, all those kind of things. So that's kind of how our process works. And we are at the end of our presentation and pre-questions. So if there's other questions from the audience or in the Q&A, I think we'll go to those now.
Okay, this is great. Very good information. I have a couple of questions myself as follow-up to some of what you and Tiki talked about. And the first one may just show my ignorance about the whole foreign material contamination process. But I think Tiki, at one point you mentioned like sieves and screens. So are
Mhm.
there, do some of the detection tools include things like that would screen out maybe
Sure,
rocks or the clear plastic that you were talking about? Is
sure.
that possible to do in a more mechanical way,
So
if you so to speak?
So I think there's two pieces to that, right? It's definitely possible to screen out some of the, if you have the appropriate setup, to screen out some of the natural foreign materials, so rocks, broken grains, sticks, those kind of things from commodities, right? That you can't help but pick those things up in the field when you harvest, right? They're going to come in there. It's definitely an option to screen those things out if you have that capability. What I've found with the plastic, so coming from dry pet food, I was used to being able to see my raw material as it entered the factory, right? I can see it, I can inspect it, I can take samples of it, all of the things. When this material arrives to a freeze dried or frozen plant, it's frozen in a big
Yeah,
old block, right? And so I can open the box and I can look at it, but I may or may not see anything, right? A
sure.
lot of, so you're sort of receiving everything on blind faith, right? And you
Um,
don't know that there's a problem until you go and start to use that material, right? And it's much more reliant, it's been my experience anyway, very limited. It's much more reliant on a visual inspection than what I was used to in more of a dry pet food world.
okay. So yeah, if anyone listening in has more experience with frozen or freeze-dried
Right.
pet food or
Yeah.
the
Please
kinds
tell
of
me.
things that, yeah, please put your
Send me a note.
comments in the chat box. Another follow-up, so you've talked a lot about the people component, not only talking to the people and getting them to feel safe speaking up, but also, like how are you opening the bags and stuff you do.
Mhm.
I mean, how much of that kind of thing is part of training for most pet food companies or even food companies, that they train their newer employees and maybe have ongoing training about like, here's how foreign material contamination happens.
Not
Is
near
that
enough.
part of it, or
Not
is
near
that a
enough.
problem?
Right. I
Okay,
think it becomes a yearly part of your alchemy GMP training. I mean, it's not a focus, right? It's not a focus until it is a focus, right? And I want to kind of go back for a minute to talk about something Paula touched on around costs, right? When you saw that
hmm
slide about the cost of a foreign material, right? And the reason it's so important to understand how your plant operates and what's possible in your facility and what's not possible, because when you have foreign material that you can 100% assign back to a vendor, whether that's by Paula's help or not Paula's help, right? If I need to use her and I'm 99% confident that came from a vendor, guess who's going to get to pay the bill? Not me, right?
Right.
I'm going to
Yeah.
go back after that vendor for compensation, right? Whether that's a credit or whatever, right? Because if I didn't introduce it into my stream and I've controlled everything that I can possibly control, now I'm gonna have that conversation with them, right? And so
Sure.
don't be afraid to have those conversations, but you've got to know if it's you
Right.
or not, right? Because the worst thing you can do is be like, oh yeah, we don't have those, we don't have those bolts, widgets, things, and then somebody from maintenance comes and goes, yeah, we actually do.
Or no, no one would open a plastic bag anywhere close to the
Yeah,
hopper and then
yeah,
find
and
out.
maybe those things have happened to me before. so so
So it
yeah,
sounds
just
like that's an opportunity for some
yeah, an
companies to look at
opportunity.
as
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
training.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely it is. I found that if you tell people, if I went out to the floor yesterday and I said, stop opening that box like that with that knife, and I walked off, they're like, I don't know you. Why are you talking to me? And go away. Right.
Right.
Hey, we've got a problem. Here's the problem. Here's one of the things I think we could do to fix it. If we change the way we open this, we move ourselves away, maybe we can find a better solution. And I think when you tell people the why behind what you're asking them to do, they're a lot more compliant.
Of course. Yeah. I think that's true with a lot of things. And so this kind of sort of leads into one of the audience questions that came in beforehand, and it may be a little bit redundant to some of the material you've covered, but are there other precautions and readiness that companies should be taking to be aware and prepared? I think we just talked about training. We just talked about
Sure.
you've covered, the mitigation. Is there, as an education program, that's my example. That's not what the person offered, but
Sure. Yeah. I think I'd still lean back on supplier control, right? It's so important to have a supplier approval program, and so important to talk to your suppliers and go see what they can do and what they can't do for you. Or, like I said, having that relationship typically with your procurement department really helps, right? Because I'm not talking to these suppliers. It's not typically
Right,
me, right?
right,
It's the procurement folks that have that relationship, and making sure you have that upfront understanding with them that these are our expectations, right? That's another, I think, important thing that people forget about sometimes is the spec, right? If
sure,
I receive something and it's got foreign material in it, or it's got insects in it, which is also kind of a foreign material, right? And I didn't tell you that, I have a limit for rocks or something, right? If I have a limit for rocks and I didn't tell you, and you send me some rocks and I reject, then you don't understand why that happened, right? So being very clear with your suppliers about what your expectation is around foreign material control, right? Around
right.
insect control, pathogen control, whatever the controls you're trying to put on them, make sure that they understand that.
And that is part of
Yeah.
your audit,
Hmm.
supplier
Yeah. And
audits and verification and all that. Yeah.
FlexRay can help with that, as terms of if you have a certain rock limit or something like that, um, put your suppliers on a approval or routine inspection. Like, you must inspect the first 3 loads before I use you as a new supplier to make sure there's no metal or rocks or whatever, and you pass. So then maybe you get checked once every 6 months or quarterly. You don't pass, and you have to go through, 3 more loads of product that needs to be inspected at FlexRay before you actually receive it to use in your product. And that, it establishes that you're serious about this, but it also gives you data around that supplier and if they're really worth being your supplier, or what you need to do, because when you use their product, you know that there's going to be an issue. And so we need to adjust how we're going to use that ingredient in our process.
Right. Okay. And I know you touched on this, but there was a question about the best method of detection for small, flexible plastic pieces, especially things like gloves or pieces of liners. I mean, is that one type of detection tool, or is that a multi?
I wish I knew what it was, because I would be getting it today.
Oh.
We, it is the hardest. It is the most common thing that I've seen in the last 3 to 4 months. It is the hardest thing for us to find. We typically don't find it until a good ways down the process, and there's a lot of optical detection things out there. I've not had the experience with optical detection with plastic. There's some optical detections you can use in kibble, right? Looking for broken pieces of kibble and different things. That's the experience I'd had. I'd welcome anybody if you have any idea, right? Because I go to Paul all the time. I'm like, anything yet? We got anything yet? Because I don't know what to do with this stuff, y'all. I just don't know.
Is that the same with rubber gloves? Is that the same situation
Yeah,
with
I mean, for the
pieces of
most
gloves?
part, yeah, for the most part, pieces of glove, pieces of clear plastic, at least with the gloves, typically they're a color, right? And so we can
Right.
see
Yeah.
them. They're very vibrant. Most factories will use, if you require gloves, they may have different colors for different portions of the factory. So you could understand, well, did it come in with the raw material or did it come in from packaging or wherever that came from, right? And so it helps you start to narrow down where you might have an issue, right? Is there a place where people are getting their gloves hung on something and it's tearing them all the time, like that kind of thing. But yeah, I think if they're a color, they're easier to see. Honestly, I've not seen a lot. It just in my personal experience, I've not seen a lot of glove problems. But I think again, it leans back onto your GMP training, right? Why are we asking you to do what you're doing? Why are we asking you to put this PP on? Why do you need to wash your hands after you touch XYZ, right? It's explaining the why and getting people to be compliant with your GMP program.
Okay.
We've had a lot of compliance in this particular factory where I'm at this week. They are 100% compliant every time I'm here with their hair nets and beard nets. I have no idea why. I have no idea why. Right. And I'm like, hey, what have you been doing? And you know why? Because they talk about it every single day. It's what they
And
chose to.
maybe because they know you're coming.
Well, maybe, but they sometimes don't know I'm coming, right? I just show up.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah,
Okay. I don't know if this may be a little bit outside of the scope of this discussion, but what's the best way to get ahead of and address negative media coverage after a contamination event?
media training. I don't.
Oh, okay.
You're right. I've worked for some larger pet food companies in the past. Anybody that was at the director level or above was media trained. They taught you how to speak to the media, what to say, what not to say. If you don't have that capability, just my encouragement personally, if you don't have that capability, hire a third party communicator. Don't take that on yourself. Don't put yourself out there and be like, newscast hero. Not You don't want that, right? If you don't have that expertise in your company, there's tons of folks out there that do that.
Yeah.
That's what they do, right? Hire you a corporate communicator. And if you need to know one, shoot me an email and I'll give you a couple of names because I've used them and they're good. That's
Okay.
what
And I
they
think
do.
most of them would say also you need to have not only that, but also a plan in place before an event
Sure.
happens. We
Yeah,
call it contamination.
if you don't have a good recall strategy or you don't have a good retrieval strategy or whatever that is, I mean, that's certainly your first order of business. But encouraging your folks to, basically zip it. If someone jams a microphone in your face, just say, I'm sorry, I can't comment, and get somebody, get a hold of somebody that actually can speak to it. Because you're messaging out to the media. If I don't know if you've ever seen clips before, right, where they'll talk to somebody and that's not what the person said, right? They
Then
took some
take it out of context.
yeah,
Yeah.
tiny piece of information from that conversation and they will replay it. If you watch your local media, if you have something happen in your region that, let's say, it affects cereal, they may show a picture of Cheerios, right? They may have a stock thing of Cheerios in Kellogg playing or whatever, and that's not even who's on recall, right? It doesn't have
Right.
anything
Yeah.
that happens in pet food all the time. They'll show a stock photo of Imes, and they're over here talking about some other recall, right? It doesn't have anything to do with the Imes. So be careful what you say, be careful what you show, be careful what you share.
Good advice. And I'm sure that your expertise or someone like Flex X-Ray's expertise would come in on the back end of helping to provide the data and the
For sure.
here's what happened and what
Right.
we're doing to make sure it doesn't happen again,
That's right.
kind of thing. Okay. Is there anything else either of you wanted to share before we wrap this up?
I don't think so.
No, Tiki, I appreciate you giving
Okay.
insight and
Sure.
to the audience, for material, Obviously, your goal is prevention, but if that hasn't worked and you get yourself into a situation where you have product on hold, like I said earlier, first of all, champion the fact that you have it under control and then give us a call and we'd be happy to help you out.
Yeah, you guys don't be afraid to call Paula. She'll help you out. It doesn't cost anything to ask her questions. It doesn't cost anything for her to look at your material and tell you, "Oh, yeah, I think we might be able to help you." Or very plainly, "I can't help you this time, kiddo." Don't be afraid to ask, and don't be afraid to list some of these folks to get you some help, because I'm not an expert, right? I've got a lot of experience and a lot of it's been connected to Paula. So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask for help, whether that's in your network or with a third party. There is nothing proprietary about food safety and quality. There's not, right?
Agreed.
If you,
Absolutely.
you need
And
help,
in
ask.
term, yeah, food safety isn't proprietary. That's great, Tiki. And the other thing is she brought up is sending us a sample doesn't cost you anything. So
That's right.
it does not hurt to send me a sample and a case of your product and see what we can see.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much.
You're
Very
welcome.
interesting discussion. I learned a lot. I hope everyone else on the call did too, and can use this in their plants. Thank you again to FlexRay for your generous support and sponsorship. Please watch for future Ask the Pet Food Pro Zoom discussions and webinars coming later this year and probably into next year. Those will probably be a lot leading up to Pet Food Forum 2027 next year, which is, by the way, is April 26th to 28th. Also, please remember that the recording of this chat will be available in about a week on petfoodforumevents.com under the More tab. Thank you again for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day or evening.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thanks so much.